hospital stood near the coastline, where the wind always carried a faint smell of salt and fuel from a nearby military base. Most mornings were busy, but that day felt different from the start. The air seemed tight, like something was about to happen. Inside the emergency department, monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. Stretchers rolled across the polished floor. Phones rang nonstop. It was a kind of controlled chaos that hospital workers understood well. She arrived for her shift 10 minutes early, as she always did. Her steps were uneven but steady. The slight limp in her left leg was noticeable, especially when she was tired. She wore a simple brace under her scrubs, hidden but not invisible. Some people pretended not to notice it. Others stared for a second too long. She signed in quietly and tied her hair back. No drama. No small talk. Just work. A younger nurse at the desk glanced at her leg, and then at the assignment board. Trauma bays were already being prepared for a large emergency drill that had been scheduled weeks ago. Military coordination training. High alert simulation. Everyone had been talking about it. "Did you hear?" Someone whispered near the supply cabinet. "They're expecting multiple air transports today." She nodded once, but didn't join the conversation. Her hands moved confidently as she checked equipment. Oxygen lines. 4 kits. Blood pressure cuffs. She tested everything twice. She had a habit of double-checking things others assumed were fine. Some co-workers found it excessive. Others quietly appreciated it. Around mid-morning, the overhead speaker crackled. "Attention staff. All trauma teams report to briefing area." Chairs scraped against the floor as people gathered. The charge coordinator stood at the front, serious and sharp. "We've just been informed," he said, "that a real incident has occurred during offshore military exercises. This is not a drill anymore." The room went silent. "A training accident happened about 20 miles out. We are preparing to receive multiple injured personnel. Air transport confirmed." The weight of the words settled slowly. This wasn't practice. This was real. Assignments were given quickly. Trauma Team A, Trauma Team B, Surgical Prep, Airway Management, Rapid Response Units. She stepped forward slightly when the coordinator paused. "I can take trauma too," she said calmly. He looked at her leg before he looked at her face. The pause lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt longer. "We need full mobility," he replied. "Fast transfers. Fast repositioning." "I understand," she said evenly. "Stay on standby. Assist with supplies." The decision was firm. A few staff members avoided eye contact. No one spoke up. It was easier that way. She stepped back without argument. Inside, something tightened in her chest. Not anger. Not exactly. Just a quiet disappointment she had learned to live with. She moved toward the supply cart and began organizing saline bags, labeling medication trays, checking emergency scissors. Her hands did not shake, but her mind drifted for a moment. There was a time when no one questioned her ability to move fast. There was a time when speed meant the difference between life and death, and she had never once been told to stand back. A stretcher rushed past her, wheels rattling. She focused again. Outside, sirens could be heard in the distance, not hospital ambulances. Deeper, louder. The younger nurse from earlier walked up beside her. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," she replied. "You've handled worse than drills." She gave a small smile but said nothing. The emergency entrance door slid open as paramedics hurried in to coordinate landing space logistics. Radios buzzed with updates. Air support en route. Multiple helicopters. The coordinator barked instructions. Clear the helipad zone. Notify security. Trauma teams a position. She picked up a box of sterile gloves and carried it toward Trauma Bay 2 anyway. No one stopped her from setting things up. They just didn't assign her to lead. She placed instruments in perfect order. For lines ready. Monitor cables untangled. She adjusted the bed height without being asked. Her limp became more noticeable when she moved quickly, but she didn't slow down. Across the room, 2 nurses whispered softly. Why does she always push herself? She should just accept lighter duty. She's lucky to still be working here. Lucky. The word echoed in her mind. Luck had nothing to do with survival, or skill, or training. She had earned every inch of where she stood. Another announcement came through. First air unit arriving in 5 minutes. The energy in the room shifted from preparation to anticipation. Doctors slipped on gloves. Surgical masks were secured. 4 poles were positioned. She stepped closer again. "I can assist airway management," she offered quietly to the team lead. The doctor hesitated. "We need quick pivot movement." "I can manage." He looked uncertain, but before he could respond, the coordinator stepped in. "She'll handle supply relay," he said firmly. It wasn't cruel. It was protective in his mind, but it still felt like a door closing. She nodded once more. The sound of rotor blades began faintly in the distance. At first it blended with the hum of hospital machines. Then it grew louder, deeper, stronger. The windows trembled slightly. Staff members looked at each other. "That's more than one," someone murmured. She stepped closer to the glass panel near the corridor. 1 helicopter would have been expected. 2 might mean severe injuries. But the sound outside multiplied. The ground began to vibrate. Security guards rushed toward the helipad doors. "For units incoming," a voice crackled over the radio. 4. The room fell silent again. Even the coordinator looked surprised. "That's excessive for a training accident," one doctor whispered. She didn't say anything. She just watched the sky through the narrow window. Her breathing slowed. Rotor blades sliced through the air as the first helicopter descended. Dust and loose debris swirled violently across the landing zone. The second followed close behind. Then the third. Then the fourth. Perfect formation. Military precision. The younger nurse beside her swallowed nervously. "Why so many?" No one answered. The hospital entrance doors burst open as Marine personnel began moving quickly but calmly across the landing area. Their uniforms were sharp, their posture disciplined. They secured the perimeter with quiet authority. Inside the hospital hallway, staff gathered, unsure whether to move forward or wait for instruction. The coordinator adjusted his badge and stepped toward the entrance. "Positions," he ordered. She remained near the trauma bay doorway, watching. Something about the formation outside felt different. This didn't look like a chaotic emergency response. It looked organized, intentional. The first Marine officer stepped through the sliding doors, scanning the room with focused eyes. His boots echoed against the floor. He did not appear frantic. He appeared determined. The coordinator approached him quickly. "We're prepared for incoming casualties." The officer nodded once but did not immediately respond. Instead, his gaze moved across the staff, past the doctors, past the nurses, as if searching. She felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air. Her grip tightened slightly on the supply cart. The officer took another step forward, and then the rotors outside continued to thunder, shaking the glass once more. The hospital that had just told her to stay back now stood frozen, waiting to understand why 4 Marine helicopters had landed at once. And she stood quietly in the middle of it all, unseen by most. For now, the sound of the helicopter blades did not fade after landing. They kept spinning, loud and heavy, pressing against the hospital walls like a warning that something serious was happening. Inside the emergency corridor, no one moved for a moment. The Marine officer who had walked and stood tall, his uniform neat despite the wind outside. 2 other Marines followed behind him. They did not rush. They did not shout. But their presence filled the hallway in a way that made everyone step aside, without being told. The hospital coordinator straightened his shoulders. "We're ready to receive the injured," he said again, trying to take control of the situation. The officer looked at him calmly. "We are not here for general intake," he replied. The sentence confused everyone. A few doctors exchanged looks. Nurses tightened their grip on clipboards. Someone near the desk whispered, "What does that mean?" The officer's eyes moved across the staff once more. He seemed to be searching for someone specific. "We're looking for Angel 6, he said clearly. The name hung in the air. Silence followed. No one responded. The coordinator frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "Angel 6, the officer repeated, firmer this time. "She was stationed here after medical discharge. We were informed she works at this facility." Murmurs started immediately. Is that a patient? Is that a code name? Is this some kind of mistake? The younger nurse, standing near the supply cart, felt her heart race. She slowly turned her head toward the woman with the limp, but the limping nurse did not move. She stood still, her face calm, her eyes steady. The coordinator cleared his throat. "Sir, we don't have anyone on staff by that name." The officer took one more step forward. His boots echoed sharply against the tile. "She may not go by that name here," he said, "but that is her call sign." Call sign. The word shifted the energy in the hallway. It was not a nickname. It was something earned. Across the room, the younger nurse's eyes dropped to the trauma bag, resting near the supply station. It was older than the others, slightly faded. She had noticed it before, but never paid attention to the small stitch patch on the inside flap. Today, for some reason, she remembered. Her breathing became shallow. Slowly, she looked back at the limping nurse. "You!" she whispered under her breath. The Marine officer followed her gaze. And that was the moment everything changed. His posture stiffened instantly. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward the woman standing quietly beside the trauma bay. The hallway parted for him. Staff stepped aside, unsure what was happening, but sensing it was important. He stopped in front of her. For a brief second, the loud rotor blades outside were the only sound anyone could hear. Then he raised his hand in a sharp, formal salute. The movement was precise, respectful, clear. "Ma'am," he said, "Angel 6. Every person in that corridor froze. The coordinator's face drained of color. The younger nurse's mouth fell slightly open. A doctor dropped the pen he had been holding. The limping nurse did not look surprised. She held the officer's gaze for a moment, then gently returned the salute. "At ease," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, familiar with authority. The officer lowered his hand, but the respect in his expression did not fade. "We apologize for arriving unannounced," he continued, "but we were instructed to locate you immediately." The coordinator finally found his voice. I'm sorry. There must be some confusion. She's one of our staff nurses." "Yes," the officer replied evenly. "We are aware." He turned back to her. "One of our senior flight leaders was injured during offshore maneuvers. Condition unstable. He regained consciousness briefly during transport." The hallway seemed to shrink. "He asked for you," the officer finished. The words settled heavily. The younger nurse felt goosebumps rise on her arms. The coordinator looked completely lost. Why would Marine officer request a civilian nurse? The officer did not answer him. Instead, he spoke directly to her. He said only one name before losing consciousness again. He said, "Angel 6. She remained still for a moment. Her eyes did not show fear. They did not show pride. They showed focus. "How critical?" she asked simply. "Severe internal injuries," he replied. Airborne triage was performed, but he refused sedation until we confirmed we had contacted you. A deep breath moved through her chest. The hallway was silent now. No whispers, no confusion, just listening. The coordinator stepped closer, trying to regain control. "With respect, she is currently assigned to supply support. We have trauma teams ready." The officer turned slowly toward him. With equal respect, he said, "Our flight leader is alive today because of her decisions years ago. He trusts her judgment. So do we." That sentence shifted something inside the room. The younger nurse felt her entire understanding of her co-worker collapse and rebuild in seconds. Years ago, decisions, trust. The limping nurse reached down and picked up her trauma bag. Her movements were smooth, practiced. "How long until arrival?" she asked. 5 minutes, the officer replied. She nodded once. Then she turned toward the trauma bay she had prepared earlier. "Clear the central bed," she instructed calmly. "Raise at 2 inches. Prepare rapid blood units. Alert surgical backup." Her tone was steady, not loud, but every word carried weight. And for the first time that day, no one hesitated. The same staff who had doubted her now moved instantly. The coordinator opened his mouth as if to object, then closed it again. Something in her presence had changed. Or maybe it had always been there, and they were only seeing it now. The younger nurse rushed to adjust the monitor settings. A doctor stepped beside her. "What's his blood type?" he asked. "Oh, negative on standby," she replied without turning around. "Cross-match when he arrives." The officer watched her quietly, a faint look of relief crossing his face. Outside, the helicopter blades grew louder again. One unit began repositioning for patient transfer. The hallway filled with focused motion. No chaos, no shouting, just preparation. The coordinator stood off to the side, trying to process what he had missed all this time. "You were military?" he asked her softly. She didn't look up. "I was medical support," she answered. He swallowed. "You never mentioned—" "It wasn't relevant," she said gently. There was no bitterness in her tone, just truth. The automatic doors burst open as stretcher teams rushed in from the helipad. Wind and dust followed them. On the stretcher lay a Marine officer, pale but breathing. Monitors were attached, for line secured. His uniform cut carefully for emergency access. She stepped forward immediately. Her limp was visible as she moved, but it did not slow her. The Marine officer who had saluted her stepped aside, giving her full access. For a brief second, the injured man's eyes fluttered open. They searched the room. Then they found her. Relief softened his expression. "You came," he whispered faintly. "I'm here," she replied. The words were simple, but the room felt them. The stretcher locked into place. She began assessing him quickly, her hands confident and precise. "BP?" she asked. A nurse responded immediately. Pulse. Another answered. Her voice guided the room now. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with calm authority that could not be questioned. The coordinator stood frozen near the wall, realizing the truth. The nurse he had told to stay back was the one everyone else had flown across the sea to find. And outside, 3 helicopters remained idling on the landing zone, waiting, not for orders, but for her. The moment felt heavy in the room. Everyone watched her move with quiet authority, her hands steady as she checked monitors and adjusted 4 lines. But beneath that calm surface, years of untold stories lingered. The hospital staff had only seen her now in the here and now, but few knew the full history behind the woman they had once dismissed as the limping nurse. It began in a small military base overseas, where she had been assigned as a frontline combat trauma specialist. She was younger then, fitter, faster, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing that people's lives depended on your decisions every second. She had been embedded with Marine units on high-risk missions, the kind where chaos was constant and there was no room for hesitation. It was there she had earned the call sign Angel 6, a name that now reverberated across the hospital corridor with authority. Her hands had stabilized soldiers under fire, controlled hemorrhages that seemed impossible to stop, and made split-second calls that had saved lives countless times. One night, during a particularly violent mission, a helicopter had been forced down in hostile territory. 6 Marines had been critically wounded, and she had stayed behind while others evacuated. She moved from one soldier to the next, triaging, bandaging, performing emergency procedures in the dark, under fire, until every Marine was secured and airborne. That night had earned her the name, earned respect, and also earned the injury that had left her with the limp she now bore. Years later, she had returned home, discharged but still carrying the weight of those nights, the memories of decisions that could have gone wrong in seconds. The limp was a reminder, not of weakness, but of sacrifice, and she had quietly integrated into civilian life, taking up nursing at the city hospital, never mentioning her past unless asked, never showing off. It was humility shaped by experience and by survival. As she worked on the stretcher, checking the injured Marines' vitals, the younger nurses and doctors finally began to understand the truth. This wasn't just a nurse with a limp. This was a seasoned professional who had faced real battlefields, who had been trusted by people trained to trust no one lightly. She had done things they could barely imagine, and now those same skills were saving someone here in their hospital on a day that seemed ordinary until the helicopters arrived. The Marine officer who had saluted her watched quietly. His expression was a mix of relief and admiration. He had seen her in the field before, knew her work, and had insisted that she be the one to oversee the emergency care. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't typical chain of command. It was respect earned through years of proven skill and courage. The injured Marine stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. Panic briefly crossed his face, as pain and confusion mingled. Then, as if recognizing her without seeing her clearly, he whispered, "Angel 6," and a faint sense of calm passed over him. She leaned slightly closer, her voice soft but firm. "I'm here. You're safe now. Just focus on breathing." She adjusted the oxygen mask carefully, her hands moving with precision. Everything else is under control. The staff around them was now fully engaged, following her guidance. The younger nurse had quickly handed over the blood units, prepped additional 4 lines, and adjusted monitors exactly as she instructed. Doctors followed her orders, her decisions sharp, confident, and fast. The room that had doubted her only minutes ago now operated like a well-oiled machine under her direction. The coordinator stood at the back, watching silently. He felt a wave of guilt, remembering his earlier words, telling her to stay back, questioning her capability. Now he understood. He had judged her based on appearances, not knowledge, not experience, not skill. He realized, painfully, that he had nearly overlooked someone who could make a difference between life and death. And now he couldn't look away. He couldn't intervene. All he could do was watch and learn. Outside, the remaining helicopters idled on the landing zone. The personnel had not relaxed. They understood the importance of her role. Their confidence in her decisions had surpassed the standard military protocols because she had proven herself time and again in circumstances far more dangerous than this hospital emergency. Inside, she continued her assessment. The patient's vitals were unstable. There was internal bleeding, but her experience allowed her to anticipate complications before they occurred. She directed the surgical team to prepare for immediate intervention while continuing to monitor the patient closely. Every instruction was clear, concise, and delivered with authority that required no justification. The room felt tense but controlled. Time was a constant pressure, but chaos was absent. The coordination between her, the staff, and the Marines was seamless. It was a display of competence and composure that few had the opportunity to witness outside a battlefield. The hospital had become, for a moment, a different kind of front line. She glanced at the officer again, acknowledging him with a slight nod. No words were necessary. Mutual understanding passed between them, trained, disciplined, and refined by experience. Years of life-saving decisions had distilled into this calm efficiency. Every action, every word, every glance was purposeful. As the initial assessments were complete, she began preparing the patient for surgery. Her attention to detail was meticulous. Instruments were arranged in precise order. The surgical team followed her lead without hesitation. She adjusted the stretcher height, monitored vitals, and confirmed blood types. The entire process flowed under her direction, like a conductor leading an orchestra. The coordinator finally found his voice again. How did we not know?" he whispered to himself, more than anyone else. He could hardly believe that the nurse he had underestimated, the one he had dismissed, was a veteran with such critical battlefield experience. It was a lesson he would not forget. A younger doctor approached her cautiously. "Are you trained for battlefield injuries?" he asked, his voice quiet but curious. She gave a small, matter-of-fact smile. "I've handled worse than this," she said simply, without boasting. "Let's focus on the patient now." Her humility struck the team. She did not dwell on her past achievements. She did not demand recognition. She worked. She led. She saved lives. Outside, the rotor blades of the helicopters shifted as pilots prepared to depart. The Marines understood the critical nature of their trust in her. She was a link between the field and the hospital, the one person whose expertise had been proven in the most extreme conditions. They had brought her here because it mattered. They had insisted because they knew the stakes. The patient's vitals stabilized slightly, enough for surgery to begin safely. She assisted the surgical team, offering guidance when necessary, correcting procedures with precision and maintaining calm throughout. The room was quiet except for the sounds of medical equipment, her voice, and the occasional instruction. Every person present could feel the weight of her experience. The limping nurse they had overlooked had become the central figure in saving a life that day. Her presence transformed fear into confidence, confusion into clarity, and uncertainty into controlled action. The younger nurse, who had first noticed a patch inside the trauma bag, now looked at her in awe. She had known the nurse as someone quiet, capable, diligent. Now she saw a hero, someone whose past and skill commanded respect without a word. Someone whose action spoke louder than any title or position could. The coordinator approached her quietly once more. I'm sorry for doubting you earlier, he said. There was sincerity in his voice. No excuses, no defensiveness, just acknowledgement of his error. She looked at him briefly. It's not about being believed, she replied softly. It's about being ready when it matters. Her words hung in the air. The staff absorbed them. They reflected on what had just happened. They realized that appearances were deceiving. They realized that skill, experience, and dedication were often hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The surgery team continued under her guidance. The patient's life now in their hands, but with the confidence that came from her leadership. Every action, every decision, every command was deliberate and measured. As the final preparations for surgery were completed, the officer who had arrived first stepped aside, allowing her full access. His expression was one of respect and relief. He had witnessed her in action before, but this reinforced his trust. He knew that her presence was vital, that she had been the right choice from the beginning. The room that had been filled with uncertainty and doubt now operated with focus and purpose. The hospital staff who had once underestimated her were now fully engaged, inspired by the competence and calm authority she displayed. They were witnesses to a rare combination of skill, experience, and humility that transformed the moment from crisis to controlled care. In that corridor, in that operating space, the limping nurse was no longer just a figure moving quietly through the hospital. She was Angel 6, a title earned through courage, skill, and unwavering dedication. A title that demanded attention, respect, and trust. And as the surgery began, the hospital finally understood the truth. The nurse they had doubted, the one they had dismissed, had lived through experiences none of them could imagine. She had carried the weight of lives on her shoulders before, and she carried it again now, silently, without complaint, with only her focus on saving the life in front of her. The helicopters outside remained on standby, waiting for further instructions, knowing that their trust in her was not misplaced. They had flown across the sea, over distance and danger, to ensure she was here. And now, inside the hospital walls, she was proving once again why they had insisted. The room settled into a rhythm, guided by her steady hands and clear instructions. Every person involved felt the significance of the moment, understanding that they were in the presence of someone whose experience transcended the ordinary, someone whose dedication and courage had shaped lives before, and would continue to do so today. For the first time that day, the hospital staff saw clearly who she truly was. Angel 6, not just a nurse, not just a caregiver, a hero in quiet form, who had earned her place through actions, not appearances, and who commanded respect through skill, experience, and unwavering focus. The operating room was tense but controlled. Monitors beeped steadily, reflecting the rhythm of life itself, while her hands moved with purpose, steady and confident despite the chaos that could have easily swallowed anyone else. Every person in the room seemed to instinctively follow her lead. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout. She only spoke when necessary, and every word carried weight. The injured Marine lay on the stretcher, pale and trembling, eyes half closed from pain and fear. He was fragile, but under her watch, he was also safe. She began by checking the 4 lines and making small adjustments to ensure the fluids were reaching properly. Every movement was precise, born from years of practice in unpredictable, high-pressure environments where a single mistake could cost a life. Vitals are unstable, she said calmly, almost as if reporting a fact rather than issuing instructions. Prepare rapid transfusion. Monitor BP every 2 minutes. Alert surgery team to stand by for immediate exploratory procedure. Her calm authority created a ripple effect through the team. Nurses moved efficiently, anticipating her needs. Doctors followed her instructions without question. The coordinator who had doubted her earlier could only watch in awe, realizing just how wrong he had been. He had thought her limp was a limitation. Now, he understood it had never defined her. The Marine stirred slightly, groaning in pain. She leaned closer, her voice soft yet firm. "I need you to focus on your breathing. One breath at a time. You're doing fine." Her words carried reassurance, a human touch that reminded everyone in the room that courage was not just physical. It was emotional, too. A nurse handed her a blood unit, ready for immediate transfusion. She took it without looking up, quickly checking compatibility. "We need 2 more units cross-matched immediately," she instructed, her mind already calculating how to stabilize the patient before surgery. The injured Marine's breathing became irregular. Panic could have taken over the room, but her presence kept it at bay. She guided a nurse to adjust the ventilator, instructed a doctor to prepare emergency meds, and moved seamlessly between tasks without hesitation. Every motion was deliberate, yet fluid, like a conductor guiding an orchestra through a difficult, high-stakes symphony. Minutes stretched like hours. She felt the pressure of each second but didn't let it show. Her eyes scanned the monitors, noting drops in blood pressure and subtle irregularities in heart rhythm. Each change was a signal, a message that demanded immediate attention. She acted without hesitation, providing guidance to stabilize the patient. The coordinator quietly approached, his voice almost inaudible. "I can't believe, how did we miss this? We judged her before knowing her." She glanced briefly at him, her expression calm but firm. "It's not about judgment," she said. "It's about readiness. And being ready means focusing on what matters when it counts, not appearances." He nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson as he watched her in action. The room had transformed, from chaos to coordinated efficiency, all under the guidance of someone who had been dismissed as limited because of a limp. Outside, the remaining helicopters were still on standby. The pilots understood that the trust placed in her was not casual. They had flown long distances and had risked much to ensure she was here. Her reputation, earned over years in the field, had brought her to this moment. Now, they waited quietly, confident that their trust had not been misplaced. Inside, she continued to work tirelessly. She monitored vitals, adjusted flow rates, and reassured the patient. Her calmness created confidence in others. The surgical team prepared for a critical procedure, guided by her precise instructions. She anticipated every need before it was voiced, every action before it was requested. A doctor approached, asking about a sudden spike in heart rate. She quickly assessed the patient and identified a complication. "We need to administer a vasopressor." "Prepare it now," she said, her hands already reaching for the medication. "Monitor response immediately. Notify me of any changes." The procedure was risky, but she moved with focus, her mind working faster than anyone else in the room. She adjusted monitors, recalculated medication doses, and ensured the patient remained as stable as possible. Each decision was made with care, precision, and experience. Time seemed to stretch infinitely. Every minute mattered, every breath counted. The injured Marine's life was balanced on a knife's edge, but her presence steadied it. Nurses followed her instructions without pause. Doctors acted confidently, supported by her leadership. The coordinator, once doubtful, now understood the value of experience over assumption. The Marine's vitals gradually stabilized, a sign that her guidance was working. She continued to monitor closely, her focus unwavering. Even with progress, she remained alert, aware that complications could arise at any moment. The officer who had first arrived remained nearby, silently observing. He knew her skills were unmatched, and the calm authority she exuded was what had drawn him to request her. Every decision she made reinforced the trust he had placed in her years ago, and reaffirmed the choice to bring her to this hospital in the first place. As the team worked, she offered quiet encouragement. "Good. Keep monitoring. Adjust as necessary. Stay calm. Focused. We can do this." Her words carried reassurance without diminishing the seriousness of the situation. The patient, though weak, began to respond positively to her interventions. His breathing steadied, his heart rate normalized slightly, and the risk of immediate collapse lessened. The room, once tense with uncertainty, now moved with controlled purpose. She finally allowed herself a brief glance at the team around her. They were working efficiently, inspired by her leadership. The younger nurse who had first noticed the patch in her bag looked at her with admiration. Doctors who had questioned her abilities earlier now followed her guidance unquestioningly. The coordinator watched, humbled and reflective. Her focus never wavered. Even as relief started to show in others, she remained alert, aware that the patient's condition could change in an instant. She adjusted the ventilator, checked medications, and ensured the surgical team was ready for the next step. Every action reinforced a simple truth. Skill, courage, and experience are not measured by appearances. They are shown in moments when lives hang in the balance and when decisions must be made quickly, confidently, and correctly. The surgery began under her supervision, and her guidance ensured that every step was executed precisely. Blood loss was controlled. Complications were managed, and the patient's condition gradually improved. Her calm authority kept the room focused, efficient, and coordinated. She did not seek recognition. She did not boast. She simply worked, her every decision guided by years of training, experience, and an unwavering commitment to saving lives. As the immediate crisis passed and the patient stabilized for further treatment, the coordinator approached once again. "I can't thank you enough. I judged you too quickly. I see now that I was wrong." She gave a small, measured smile. "It's not about thanks. It's about being ready when it matters. That's what counts." Outside, the helicopters remained, ready for further assistance if needed. The Marines understood that her role had been critical and that their trust in her had been well placed. She had stepped into a situation that demanded the highest skill, calmest presence, and clearest judgment, and she had delivered all of it. The room, once filled with doubt and hesitation, now moved in harmony. Nurses and doctors worked with confidence, inspired by her example. The injured Marine, stable for now, reflected the success of her interventions. For everyone in that hospital, the truth had become undeniable. The limping nurse they had underestimated was Angel 6. Not just a nurse, but a leader, a skilled professional, and a hero who had earned respect through action, not words, and who had reminded everyone that appearances never tell the full story. Her presence had changed the course of the day. She had taken control, guided a critical emergency with precision, and stabilized a life that could have been lost. Every person in the room knew it. Every Marine outside the room knew it. And most importantly, the injured Marine lying on the stretcher now knew it too. The day had stretched long and tense. But inside the hospital, a sense of calm was finally returning. The injured Marine had been stabilized, and the surgical team had finished the critical procedure under her guidance. Monitors beeped steadily now, reflecting a rhythm that was close to normal, though the air still carried the faint tension of what had just passed. Everyone in the room could feel it. The difference between disaster and survival had been her presence, her decisions, her steady hands and mind. The hospital staff moved quietly, organizing instruments and cleaning spaces, but there was a newfound respect lingering in the air. Those who had doubted her abilities earlier were now silent, observing her with an appreciation they had never expressed before. The coordinator, who had once told her to stay back, stood near the wall, struggling with words. Finally, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "I should have seen this before. I judged her wrong." She glanced at him briefly, still focused on the remaining tasks, adjusting 4 lines and checking vitals. Her expression did not carry pride, only calm acknowledgement. "It's not about being believed," she said gently. "It's about being ready when it matters. That's all." The younger nurse who had first noticed a patch inside her trauma bag now looked at her with admiration, eyes wide. She had watched someone quiet, meticulous, and underestimated transform into a leader who had guided an entire emergency with precision and authority. Others in the room mirrored that feeling. They had all seen her skills, and now they knew her story, even if they didn't yet know all the details. The Marine officer who had requested her remain nearby, silent and watchful. He had been through high-risk situations where trust was a matter of life and death, and he had insisted that she be the one to handle the patient. Now, seeing her work, guiding the team, stabilizing the Marine, he understood completely why. Her presence had been decisive. Her experience had been invaluable. Her calm had prevented chaos. Every action, every decision had reinforced the trust he had placed in her. Outside, the remaining helicopters were ready, engines idling, pilots prepared for any instructions. They knew that their trust in her had not been misplaced. They had flown far to ensure she was here, and her performance had proven the wisdom of that choice. The world outside the hospital, with all its speed, danger, and uncertainty, had met her in this moment, and she had met it back without hesitation. Inside, she finished double-checking the patient's vitals. The monitors indicated stability, and the surgical team confirmed that the critical phase had passed successfully. She turned briefly to the assembled staff, her gaze calm but direct. "We did everything we could. Keep monitoring. The patient is stable for now." Her words were simple, yet carried the weight of authority and experience. The coordinator stepped closer, this time more intentionally. "I want to apologize for earlier," he said, voice sincere. "I underestimated you. I judged your ability based on nothing but appearances. I see now that I was wrong." She looked at him, not coldly but firmly, and gave a small nod. "We all make judgments," she said. "It's better when we see the truth before it matters, but what counts is how we act when it does." The room fell quiet for a moment, filled with a hum of machines, the rustle of scrubs, and the faint echo of rotor blades from the helipad outside. The hospital had become a place where respect was earned not through appearances or assumptions, but through action, calmness, and unwavering competence. A few staff members, who had watched from a distance, finally stepped forward. "I'm sorry," one whispered, voice barely audible. "We didn't know." She turned to them, expression gentle. "You didn't need to," she said. "Focus on the patient. That's what matters." The Marine officer spoke quietly, confirming the patient's condition and coordinating the next steps for care and recovery. He glanced at her with gratitude, a look that conveyed far more than words ever could. He knew, as did she, that the patient's life had been secured because of her skill and presence. Meanwhile, the helicopters outside waited, silent witnesses to what had just unfolded. The pilots understood the significance of her actions. Their trust had been placed in her, and it had been justified. The limping nurse, underestimated by many, had transformed this emergency into a success through her experience, calm authority, and human touch. The injured Marine now lay more comfortably, connected to stable monitors, and carefully managed 4 lines. His breathing was steady and his eyes, though still weak, were calmer. He whispered her call sign again, Angel 6, and she gave a small, reassuring smile, responding softly, "I'm here." The hospital staff around them reflected on what they had just witnessed. The woman they had dismissed because of a limp, because she seemed ordinary, had handled a situation that could have spiraled into tragedy. They realized that courage and skill were not always visible, that experience was often quiet, and that humility could coexist with extraordinary competence. Outside, the helicopters finally received clearance to depart. The officers and pilots moved with purpose, but not urgency. They understood that their mission here was complete, at least for now, and that the person they had come for had ensured it. Their respect for her was unspoken but deeply felt. She had earned it not by words, not by claiming authority, but by being the person capable of handling what most could not. Back in the hallway, staff began to relax, though the tension of the day lingered. The coordinator, once doubtful and cautious, now looked at her with genuine admiration. The younger nurses and doctors who had observed quietly were inspired, understanding that appearances could be deceiving, and that true skill, courage, and leadership were revealed in moments like this. She gathered her bag, checking once more that all necessary equipment was in place. She did not linger for praise. She moved with quiet efficiency, ensuring the patient's care would continue seamlessly. Her focus remained on the work, on the lives she had been entrusted to protect, rather than on accolades or recognition. Before leaving, she allowed herself a brief glance at the assembled staff. Her gaze was calm, steady, and filled with a subtle reminder of the lessons learned that day. Preparation, skill, focus, and courage mattered far more than assumptions or appearances. The coordinator finally spoke again, voice firm but humble. "From now on, you'll be treated as a professional you are, not just another nurse on duty." She smiled faintly, a small acknowledgement, and said, "I've always done my job. That's all anyone can expect." Outside, the last helicopter lifted, engines humming steadily, carrying with it the memory of trust placed wisely and fulfilled. The Marine officers' team returned to base, their confidence in her actions reaffirmed. Her legacy as Angel 6 was recognized not just by her colleagues, but by the people who had depended on her for survival. The hospital staff, once uncertain, now moved with a renewed sense of purpose. They had witnessed the difference a single person could make when skill, calmness, and dedication intersected. The limping nurse they had doubted had transformed a critical emergency into a story of survival, professionalism, and human courage. In the quiet that followed, as the monitors beeped and the staff prepared for the next routine, no one called her the limping nurse. They whispered her name instead, with respect, admiration, and gratitude. Angel 6, a title earned through bravery, action, and the unwavering commitment to saving lives. And in that moment, everyone understood. Heroism often comes quietly, and true courage is shown not in appearances, but in the steady, selfless acts that make the difference between life and death.